What if the real reason you feel stuck, disconnected, or ready to give up isn't your life, but the small moments you keep ignoring every day? In this story, I share how a quiet marriage, a northern husband, and simple routines like sweating and laughing together slowly changed everything. Not through perfect words, but through real connection, slow English, and honest effort, until one day, I realized I wasn't just surviving. I was finally living. Cold shower truth. What if the real reason you feel stuck, disconnected, or ready to give up isn't your life, but the small moments you keep ignoring every day? That question didn't come from a self-help book. It didn't come from a motivational video. It came to me, on a very normal morning. The kind of morning that should have been forgettable. Picture this. You're standing under the shower. The water is colder than you expected. You turn the knob a little, then a little more, but it never quite reaches the temperature you want. And in that moment, something strange hits you. You've done this before. Not just with water. With your life. That morning, I stood there, staring at the wall, and I whispered to myself, slowly, something is off. There was no big problem. No drama. No arguments. No one leaving. And that's exactly what made it unsettling. Everything looked fine, but nothing felt right. Have you ever felt that? Life keeps moving. You eat, you sleep, you talk. But inside, it feels like you're slowly turning your own volume down. Not broken. Just fading. I was living with my husband, my quiet, northern hubby. He's the kind of man who doesn't talk much, doesn't ask deep questions every day, doesn't fill the room with noise. But he shows love, in very quiet ways. And over time, that quiet started to feel like distance. We would sit in the same room, but live in two completely different worlds. He watched the news. I scrolled on my phone. Sometimes we exchanged short questions. Did you eat? You okay? And then, silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind of silence where your thoughts get louder than you want them to be. Am I boring? Am I not enough? Why does this feel so far, when we are so close? You see, the problem wasn't vocabulary. It wasn't grammar. It wasn't even English. It was connection. But I didn't realize that at the time. I thought the problem was me. My level. My speaking. My confidence. Maybe if I speak better, things will feel better. Sound familiar? Your brain loves simple explanations. It hates uncertainty. So it gives you a clean, easy answer. It's your English. And that feels logical. But it's not the full truth. Because there were days I said very little, and still felt close. And there were days I tried to say more, but felt even more distant. That's when something uncomfortable clicked. It's not about how much you speak. It's about how real you are when you speak. But here's the trap. When you get used to playing it safe, you start using safe sentences. Simple sentences. Low-risk sentences. And slowly, you stop saying what you actually feel. And that's when relationships start to cool down, just like that shower that never gets warm enough. I remember one moment clearly. My husband walked into the kitchen, looked at me, and asked, "You okay?" Such a normal question. And I answered, "Yeah, I'm fine." But the second I said it, I knew it wasn't true. And I didn't correct it. Why? Because telling the truth feels risky. Even in love. You're afraid of saying the wrong thing. Afraid of being misunderstood. Afraid of making things awkward. So you choose silence. Or you choose a safer version of the truth. And over time, you don't just hide your feelings. You forget how to express them. That's when I started feeling like I was disappearing inside my own life. Not in a dramatic way. Just, quietly. And here's the interesting part, this doesn't just happen to me. It happens to a lot of people who live or communicate in a second language. Psychology research shows that when you use a non-native language, your emotional expression tends to shrink. You simplify. You filter. You protect yourself. That sounds helpful. But over time, it reduces emotional connection. You don't feel as deeply. Not because you don't want to, but because you don't know how to express it naturally. And that's the dangerous loop. You speak less, you feel distant, you speak even less. A silent loop. And that morning, under the cold shower, I realized I was stuck in it. Not because I was weak. Not because I wasn't good enough. But because I got used to keeping everything simple, until I lost what was real. So I asked myself one question. Not dramatic. Not life-changing. Just honest. When was the last time I said something real, even if it was imperfect? I couldn't remember. And that's when I knew something had to change. Not a big change. Not learning 1,000 new words. Not becoming fluent overnight. Just something small. Speak a little more honestly. A little slower. And allow myself to be a little awkward. It sounds simple. But to your brain, that's a revolution. Because your brain hates awkwardness. It will do everything to avoid it. But the truth is, awkwardness is where real connection begins. And I didn't know it yet, but very soon, something small, very small, would shift between me and my quiet, northern husband. A shift that didn't start with words. It started with sweat. Yes. Sweat. Sounds strange, right? But sometimes, you don't need to talk to start understanding each other. You just need to start, together. And that's where the real story begins. The quiet distance. Have you ever sat next to someone you love, and felt completely alone? Not the dramatic kind of alone. Not the "we're breaking up" kind. I'm talking about the quiet version. The one that sneaks in slowly, sits between you, and says nothing, but somehow says everything. That's where I was. Same house. Same routine. Same two people who once couldn't stop talking, now measuring conversations in short, careful sentences. Did you sleep okay? Yeah. Work good? Yeah. And just like that, conversation over. It's almost impressive how two people can reduce an entire relationship into 3 words and a nod. I started noticing something strange. It wasn't that we didn't have things to say. It was that we stopped trying to say them. Because trying felt heavy. Let me show you what I mean. One evening, we were having dinner. Nothing special. Just a normal weekday meal. He was eating quietly, like always. I looked at him and thought, I want to tell him something. Something simple. Something real. But instead, my brain did what brains do best, it overthought. Say it correctly. Don't make it weird. What if he doesn't understand? What if it sounds silly? So instead of saying anything meaningful, I asked, do you want more rice? And he said, I'm good. And that was it. A whole moment, replaced by rice. That's how distance grows. Not through big fights. But through small moments that never happen. We think distance is loud. It's not. Distance is quiet. Efficient. Invisible. It removes one honest sentence at a time until all that's left is function. Eat. Sleep. Work. Repeat. And here's the twist, you don't even notice it happening at first. Because everything still works. Bills are paid. Food is cooked. Life is stable. But connection? That slowly fades. Now here's where it gets interesting. I used to think the distance came from language. That my English wasn't good enough to express deeper thoughts. That maybe if I had better words, I would say more. But then something hit me one night. I wasn't even trying in my own language. It wasn't just English. It was fear. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of sounding different. Fear of making the moment uncomfortable. So my brain made a deal with me. Let's just keep things simple. Safe. Predictable. And honestly, it felt easier. No awkward pauses. No confusion. No risk. But also, no connection. Because connection requires something your brain doesn't like. Vulnerability. And vulnerability in a second language? That feels like walking on ice with shoes that don't fit. Every word feels slower. Heavier. Riskier. So what do? You shorten everything. You remove emotion. You stick to what's easy. And over time, you become efficient. But emotionally quiet. There's actually a psychological explanation for this. When you use a second language, your brain shifts into a more logical processing mode. Less emotional intensity. More control. More filtering. It's like your brain puts on a suit. Clean. Structured. Polite. But not very warm. And relationships don't grow in perfect sentences. They grow in messy, imperfect, sometimes awkward expressions. So here I was, living in a relationship that looked peaceful, but felt distant. And the worst part? No one was doing anything wrong. He wasn't cold. I wasn't uncaring. We were just disconnected. Quietly. One night, something small happened. We were sitting on the couch. He was watching something. I don't even remember what. I was next to him, scrolling again, pretending to be busy. And then, for a split second, I looked at him, and I felt it. That gap. Not physical. Emotional. Like we were two people sitting next to each other on different timelines. And for the first time, I didn't blame my English. I asked a different question. When did I stop showing up, honestly? Not perfectly. Not fluently. Just honestly. And the answer? I didn't know. But I knew one thing. If I kept waiting until I had the right words, I might never say anything real again. So I tried something small. Not a big conversation. Not a deep talk. Just one honest sentence. The next day, when he asked, "You okay?" Like he always does, I paused. Just for a second. And instead of saying, "I'm fine," I said, slowly, "I feel a little tired today." That's it. Not poetic. Not impressive. Not even very emotional. But it was real. And something interesting happened. He didn't give a big reaction. He didn't suddenly become super expressive. He just looked at me, and nodded. And then he said, "Yeah, me too." Two simple sentences. But somehow, it felt different. Lighter. Warmer. More human. That's when I realized something important. Connection doesn't come from perfect English. It comes from shared truth. Even small truth. Especially small truth. But here's the part most people miss. You don't rebuild connection with big emotional speeches. You rebuild it with small, consistent honesty. One sentence at a time. And yes, it feels awkward. Of course it does. Your brain will panic. It will say, "This is weird. Stop." But that discomfort? That's the signal. That's how you know you're doing something real. And I wish I could tell you that everything changed overnight. It didn't. The silence didn't disappear. The distance didn't magically vanish. But something shifted. Very slightly. Like turning the shower knob just enough to feel a bit of warmth. And that small shift. It opened the door to something unexpected. Something that didn't start with talking more. It started with doing something together. Something physical. Something uncomfortable. Something sweaty. Yeah. We didn't fix our connection with words. We started fixing it, with movement. And what happened next? Let's just say, it changed the way I understood love, communication, and even listening itself. Because sometimes, to hear each other clearly, you first have to stop trying so hard to speak. Funny but painful mistakes. Have you ever said something in English, and immediately wished you could uninstall your mouth? Not take it back. Uninstall it. Because that was me. Repeatedly. In high definition. With subtitles I didn't ask for. People love to say, mistakes are part of learning. Cute sentence. Very inspiring. Sounds great on a poster. But they never tell you how it feels in the moment. It feels like your brain and your mouth had a disagreement, and your mouth went rogue. And in a relationship, especially one that's already a little quiet, those moments don't just feel awkward. They feel loud. Let me take you into one of those moments. It was a normal afternoon. My husband was getting ready to go out. He looked at me and asked, "How do I look?" Simple question. Easy answer. At least, it should have been. In my head, I wanted to say, "You look sharp. Confident. Clean. Attractive." That kind of sharp. But what came out was, "You look dangerous." He paused. Not a small pause. A full system reboot pause. Dangerous, he repeated. And now my brain started sprinting. Because I realized, too late, that dangerous does not mean what I thought it meant in that moment. So I tried to fix it. No. I mean, like, sharp. Like knife. But good knife. Not bad knife. Great. Now I turned my husband into a weapon. He looked at me. I looked at him. And then, he laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real laugh. The kind that breaks tension without asking permission. And I laughed too. But here's the part people don't talk about. Under the laughter, there was a small sting. A quiet thought that said, "Why can't I just say it right?" That's the hidden layer of these moments. They're funny on the outside. But inside, they slowly build doubt. And when you already feel a little distant, every mistake feels like proof that you don't quite belong in the moment. So what do? You start avoiding those moments. You stop trying to say things that might go wrong. You choose safer words. Shorter sentences. Less personality. And just like that, you become less you. That's the real cost of funny mistakes. Not embarrassment. Loss of expression. There was another moment. This one, even better. We were working out together for the first time. Very basic. Nothing intense. Just moving, sweating a little, trying to build some kind of shared routine. He finished a set and asked, "How was it?" I wanted to encourage him. Be supportive. Be that positive, energetic partner. So I said, confidently, "You are very strong, like cow." Silence. You know that silence? That very specific silence where time slows down and your brain whispers, "You did it again." He blinked. "Like a cow?" he asked. And now I had two choices. Option 1, panic and try to explain. Option 2, accept my fate. I chose both. No. I mean, cow is strong. Big. Healthy. Good energy. Not fat cow. Just, strong cow. Perfect. Now I added body commentary. At this point, I wanted to disappear into the floor. But again, he laughed. And this time, something different happened. He didn't just laugh at the mistake. He laughed with me. And then he said, "Okay. I'll take that. Strong like cow. And for the first time, the mistake didn't feel like failure. It felt like connection. We kept working out. And every now and then, he would say, "Am I still strong, cow?" And I would roll my eyes and say, "Yes. Very strong, cow." It became a joke. A shared language. Not correct English. But real communication. And that's when something clicked. Maybe the goal isn't to avoid mistakes. Maybe the goal is to survive them, together. Because here's what I started noticing. Every time I made a mistake and didn't run away from it, we got closer. Not because the sentence was good, but because the moment was real. There's actually a reason for this. In psychology, shared awkwardness can increase bonding. When two people experience something slightly uncomfortable, but safe, together, it creates a sense of trust. It's like your brains are saying, "That was weird, but we're okay." And "we're okay" is the foundation of connection. So all those moments I used to fear? They were actually opportunities. Not to impress, but to connect. And here's the twist. The more I allowed myself to be imperfect, the more relaxed he became too. He started talking more. Not in big speeches, but in small additions. Small reactions. More eye contact. More presence. Because energy is contagious. If you show up tense and afraid of mistakes, the other person feels it. But if you show up open, even a little messy, it creates space. And slowly, that quiet distance we had, it started to crack. Not disappear, but shift. And the funniest part? It didn't happen because my English improved dramatically. It happened because I stopped trying to be perfect. I started being real. And real is easier to understand than perfect. Always. But don't get me wrong. It wasn't smooth. There were still awkward moments. Still wrong words. Still sentences that made no sense. But something inside me changed. I stopped seeing mistakes as proof that I'm not good enough. I started seeing them as signs that I'm actually showing up. And that shift? It's small. But powerful. Because once you stop running from mistakes, you start moving toward connection. And that's exactly what was happening. Without us even planning it. Without a big conversation. Just through small, imperfect, slightly embarrassing moments. We were rebuilding something. Quietly. Naturally. Together. And I didn't realize it yet, but those strong cow moments, they were preparing us for something bigger. Something that would require more than just words. Something that would test not just how we speak, but how we live together. Because being different is one thing. Living those differences every day, that's a whole different story. And trust me, when culture steps into your living room, it doesn't knock first. Northern Hubby energy. Have you ever loved someone, and still had no idea how they operate? Not in a dramatic way. Not like, "Who are you?" But more like, "Why do you do things like that, and why does it actually make sense to you?" That was my life with my Northern Hubby. If you've never been around someone from the northern part of the U.S., let me paint a picture. Imagine calm, but not empty. Quiet, but not cold. Structured, but not rigid. And then add one more layer. They don't explain themselves unless absolutely necessary. That's him. At first, I thought he was distant. Then I thought he was just quiet. Then I went through a phase where I thought, maybe he's just like this. And the truth? He is. But not in the way I first understood. Let me show you. One morning, I woke up late. I walked into the kitchen, still half asleep, expecting nothing special. And there it was, coffee already made, my cup sitting on the table, exactly how I like it. No message. No, I made this for you. No eye contact. Just, done. I looked at him and said, "You made coffee?" He nodded. Yeah. That's it. No emotional delivery. No warm explanation. Just action. Now, if you're like me, your brain doesn't immediately register that as love. You're waiting for words. Tone. Expression. But his language? It's behavior. And for a long time, I didn't speak that language. So I missed a lot. There was another moment. It was cold outside. Not just a little chilly. I mean real cold. The kind that makes your hands question your life choices. I was about to go out, struggling with layers, clearly uncomfortable. He didn't say, "Be careful." He didn't say, "Stay warm." He walked over, adjusted my jacket, zipped it up properly, and pulled the hood tighter. Then he stepped back and said, "Better." And walked away. No extra words. And again, my brain went, "That's it?" But something deeper started noticing. He wasn't lacking emotion. He was expressing it, differently. Here's where things get interesting. In many northern cultures in the U.S., communication tends to be more direct, less emotionally expressive in words, and more grounded in actions. It's not that they feel less. They just don't perform it the same way. And if you're used to verbal reassurance, this can feel confusing. Even frustrating. Because your brain is waiting for a signal that never comes, in the form you expect. So what do? At first, I did what most people do. I misinterpreted. I filled the silence with my own assumptions. He doesn't care enough. He's not expressive. He's distant. But over time, small patterns started to appear. He always fixed things before I noticed they were broken. He always showed up when something needed to be done. He didn't ask many questions, but he remembered details. And suddenly, a new thought appeared. What if he's been communicating this whole time, and I just didn't understand the language? That realization is uncomfortable. Because it shifts the responsibility. It's no longer, "He's not doing enough." It becomes, "I'm not seeing clearly." And that's a harder truth to sit with. But also, a more powerful one. Because once you see it, you can respond differently. So I tried something small. Instead of waiting for words, I started paying attention to actions. And instead of expecting him to communicate like me, I became curious about how he communicates. One evening, after our now regular workout, yes, the strong cow era was still alive, we sat down, both tired, both quiet. Normally, this would be another silent moment. But this time, I said something simple. "You don't talk much, but you do a lot." He looked at me. Not confused. Not defensive. Just, attentive. And then he said, "I guess." That was his version of a long answer. And surprisingly, it was enough. Because for the first time, I wasn't asking him to change. I was acknowledging who he already was. And that changed the energy. Not instantly. But noticeably. He didn't suddenly become talkative. He didn't start expressing emotions in long sentences. But something softened. There was more presence. More eye contact. More small reactions. And here's the interesting part. When you stop trying to fix the other person, they often become more open, on their own. Because pressure disappears. And when pressure disappears, people breathe differently. And when people breathe differently, they show up differently. Now, let's connect this back to something you might not expect. Listening. Not just hearing words, but understanding meaning beyond words. When people talk about listening like a native, they often think it's about catching every word, every sound, every detail. But in real life, it's about reading context, tone, behavior, patterns, It's about understanding what's being said, even when it's not said directly. And living with my northern hubby? That became my real training. Not from textbooks. Not from lessons. But from daily life. Because when someone says less, you learn to notice more. And that skill? It changes everything. Not just your English. Your relationships. Your awareness. Your patience. Because suddenly, communication is no longer just about speaking. It's about noticing. And reacting, in a way that fits the other person. Not just you. That's when something shifted again. The distance between us? It didn't disappear. But it became understandable. And when something becomes understandable, it becomes manageable. And when it becomes manageable, it becomes something you can work with. Together. But don't get too comfortable yet. Because understanding someone's energy is one thing. Building a relationship on top of two completely different emotional languages? That's where things get complicated. And trust me, we were about to find out. Because love doesn't just live in quiet gestures and shared workouts. It gets tested. In habits. In expectations. In everyday life. And when two cultures live under the same roof, even small things can turn into big moments. Moments that don't ask for permission. Moments that don't wait until you're ready. Moments that force you to choose. Stay quiet. Or finally speak, for real. Love without perfect words. Have you ever tried to say something meaningful, and ended up saying something safe instead? Not because you didn't care. But because you cared too much. That was the strange place I found myself in. You'd think love would make communication easier. That when two people care about each other, words would just flow. Natural. Effortless. But real life doesn't work like that. Especially when your thoughts move faster than your language. Especially when your feelings are bigger than your vocabulary. And especially when the person you love doesn't use many words to begin with. So there we were. Two people. One who felt deeply but spoke carefully. One who spoke rarely but acted consistently. And somewhere in the middle, love was trying to survive. Let me tell you about a moment that changed how I saw everything. It wasn't a big fight. Not even close. It was something so small, you could easily miss it. One evening, I had a long day. Not physically exhausting, but mentally heavy. The kind of day where nothing goes wrong, but nothing feels right either. I didn't need solutions. I didn't need advice. I just needed to feel seen. So I sat next to him and said, slowly, choosing every word like it mattered. Today. I feel a little off. Simple sentence. But for me, it was not simple at all. Because behind that sentence were many things I didn't say. I feel tired. I feel invisible. I feel like I'm trying too hard to be okay. But I didn't have the words. Or maybe I didn't have the courage. So I gave him the closest version I could. I feel a little off. He looked at me. Paused. And then he said, okay. Just, okay. No follow-up question. No emotional reaction. No, what happened? Just, okay. And in that moment, something inside me dropped. Not dramatically. But quietly. That quiet disappointment that says, that's all? And here's where most people misunderstand situations like this. It's very easy to think. He doesn't care. But that's not always true. Sometimes, it's not lack of care. It's difference in communication. Because in his mind, okay, didn't mean, I don't care. It meant, I hear you. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. But my brain didn't translate it that way. My brain wanted more. More words. More emotion. More proof. And when it didn't get it, it started creating stories. He's distant. He doesn't understand me. Maybe I'm alone in this. Sound familiar? Your brain is a storyteller. And when information is missing, it fills the gaps. Usually with the worst possible version. But here's what I didn't see in that moment. After he said, okay, he didn't walk away. He stayed. Same spot. Same quiet presence. He didn't interrupt. Didn't change the topic. Didn't distract himself. He just stayed. And something strange happened. After a few minutes, without planning it, without preparing the perfect sentence, I started talking again. A little more. A little deeper. Still not perfect. Still searching for words. But more real. And he listened. No interruption. No correction. No pressure. Just listening. That's when I realized something important. Maybe love isn't about saying the perfect thing at the perfect time. Maybe it's about creating enough safety for imperfect things to be said. Because when you feel safe, you speak more. Not because your English improves instantly, but because your fear decreases. And fear is the real barrier. Not grammar. Not vocabulary. Fear. Fear of being judged. Fear of sounding wrong. Fear of not being understood. So we simplify. We reduce. We hide behind, I'm fine. And slowly, we disconnect. But that night, something shifted. Not because he gave me a perfect response. But because he gave me space. And space is underrated. In relationships. In communication. In learning. Because your brain needs space to process. Your emotions need space to surface. And your words? They need space to exist, without pressure. There's actually a simple principle behind this. When people feel psychologically safe, their brain reduces defensive responses. That means less overthinking, less filtering, and more natural expression. In other words, you speak more freely. Even if your language isn't perfect. And that's exactly what happened. I didn't suddenly become fluent. But I became more honest. And honesty created connection. Not perfection. Now here's the twist. The next day, something unexpected happened. He came home, put his things down, and looked at me. Then he said, a little slower than usual. You feel better today? It wasn't a perfect sentence. But it was different. It was effort. His version of reaching out. And that moment? It meant more than a perfectly structured paragraph. Because it showed something important. When you open up, even imperfectly, the other person starts moving toward you too. Maybe not in the way you expect. Maybe not in the speed you want. But they move. And movement is everything. That's when I stopped chasing perfect English. I started chasing real moments. Small ones. Messy ones. Honest ones. Because those are the ones that build something real. And here's the part most people miss. You don't need big emotional conversations to create connection. You need consistent, imperfect truth. Again. And again. And again. And yes, it's uncomfortable. Of course it is. But that discomfort? That's where growth lives. That's where connection begins. And that's where love becomes real. Not in perfect sentences. But in shared effort. In quiet presence. In small, brave moments of honesty. But just when I thought I was starting to understand this new rhythm, life added another layer. Because love doesn't exist in a vacuum. It lives inside daily habits. Inside routines. Inside culture. And when two people bring completely different ways of living into the same space, even love gets tested. Not by big problems, but by small, repeated differences. Differences you can't ignore. Differences that don't go away. Differences that force you to either adapt or slowly drift apart. And trust me, we were about to face exactly that. Culture hits at home. Have you ever argued with someone without actually arguing? No raised voices. No dramatic words. Just a quiet tension that sits in the room like an invisible guest, refusing to leave. That's what cultural differences feel like. Not loud. Not obvious. But constant. And when you live together, those differences don't stay interesting or cute for long. They become daily. Let me show you how it started for us. It wasn't about big values like money or life goals. It was about something much smaller. Dishes. Yeah. Dishes. One night, after dinner, I stood up, collected the plates, and started washing them immediately. It felt natural. Automatic. Almost like a reflex. He stayed seated. Not in a rude way. Just, still sitting. At first, I didn't think much of it. But after a few days, I noticed a pattern. I cook. I clean. He doesn't move. Again, not aggressively. Not intentionally. Just, consistently. And something inside me started reacting. Not loudly. But quietly building. Why am I doing everything? Doesn't he see this? Why doesn't he just help? And here's the tricky part. I didn't say anything. Because in my mind, this was obvious. Common sense. You don't need language for this. Right? Wrong. Because what feels obvious to you is often invisible to someone else. Especially when they grew up in a completely different environment. In his world, things worked differently. Not better. Not worse. Just different. In his routine, tasks weren't always immediate. They were scheduled. Structured. Done in a certain order, at a certain time. So while I saw, dirty dishes need to be cleaned now, he saw, I'll do it later. Same situation. Different interpretation. And that's where friction begins. Not from intention. But from expectation. Now here's where it gets interesting. Your brain doesn't like unresolved expectations. So it creates meaning. He doesn't care. He's lazy. He's ignoring me. But those meanings? They're guesses. Not facts. And the more you repeat those guesses, the more real they feel. That's how small cultural differences turn into emotional distance. Quietly. Day by day. Moment by moment. Until one day, something small becomes something big. For us, that moment came, again, in the kitchen. I was washing dishes. He walked in. Looked at me. And said, "You don't have to do that now." That sentence. Simple. Neutral. But the way my brain heard it? "You're doing it wrong." And that was it. Something snapped. Not explosively. But internally. Because now it wasn't just about dishes. It was about feeling unseen. Unappreciated. Misunderstood. And for the first time in a while, I spoke. Not perfectly. Not calmly. But honestly. I feel like I do everything, and you don't see it. The sentence wasn't smooth. But it was real. And the room got quiet. Not the usual quiet. A different kind. The kind that waits. Now here's the moment that matters. He didn't interrupt. Didn't defend himself immediately. He just stood there, processing. And then he said something I didn't expect. I thought, you liked doing it right away. Pause. My mom does that. And suddenly, everything shifted. Not solved. But understood. Because in that one sentence, I saw something I hadn't seen before. He wasn't ignoring me. He was following a pattern he grew up with. Just like I was. Two systems. Two normal. Colliding in one kitchen. And neither of us was wrong. We were just different. This is where most people get stuck. They try to prove who's right. Instead of understanding what's different. But difference is not a problem. Misinterpretation is. So instead of pushing further, I tried something new. I slowed down. And said, I don't mind doing it, but I want to feel like we're doing things together. Again, not perfect English. But clear enough. And this time, he nodded. Not a quick nod. A thinking nod. And then he said, okay, we can figure something out. That sentence? Simple. But powerful. Because it wasn't a solution. It was openness. And openness is where change begins. Over the next few days, something small happened. He didn't suddenly become super active in the kitchen. But he started showing up. Little things. Putting things away. Wiping the counter. Asking, you want help? Not every time. But enough. And that's when I realized something important. Change in real life doesn't come in big, dramatic shifts. It comes in small, repeated adjustments. And those adjustments only happen when both people feel understood. Not judged. Not corrected. Understood. There's a psychological principle behind this. When people feel attacked, their brain goes into defense mode. They protect. They justify. They shut down. But when they feel understood, they open. They adapt. They participate. And that's exactly what happened. Not because we solved the dish problem. But because we stopped making assumptions about each other. Now, let's bring this back to something deeper. Listening. Real listening. Not just hearing words. But understanding context, background, intention. Because when you live with someone from a different culture, you're not just learning a language. You're learning a whole system of thinking. And that takes time. Patience. And a lot of small, imperfect conversations. And here's the twist. All those small differences, they didn't push us apart. They gave us opportunities to understand each other better. If we chose to. And slowly, that quiet tension we had, it started to transform. Not disappear. But evolve. Into something more flexible. More aware. More real. But just when things started to feel a little more stable, something unexpected happened. Because understanding each other at home is one thing. But building a shared rhythm. A shared energy. That's a whole different level. And oddly enough, it didn't happen in the kitchen. It didn't happen in a deep conversation. It happened somewhere much more uncomfortable. Somewhere with no words. No expectations. Just movement. Effort. And yes, a lot of sweat. Sweat together shift. Have you ever fixed something in your relationship without talking about it? No deep conversation. No long explanation. No, we need to talk. Just doing something together, and somehow, everything starts to feel different. That's what happened to us. And it started in the most unexpected way. With sweat. Not the romantic kind. Not the movie montage kind. I'm talking about real sweat. Messy. Uncomfortable. Slightly embarrassing. The kind that makes you question your life choices halfway through. It began on a random afternoon. He looked at me and said, "Want to work out?" That's it. No explanation. No emotional setup. Just a simple question. Now, if you know me at that time, working out was not my thing. At all. But something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe boredom, maybe a quiet desire to break the routine, said yes. And that, yes, changed everything. We didn't go to a fancy gym. No trainers. No perfect plan. Just a small space. A mat. Some basic movements. And two people, who weren't used to doing things together like this. At first, it was awkward. Of course it was. We didn't know how to move in sync. We didn't know how to encourage each other. We didn't even know how to exist in that space together. He did his thing. I did mine. Same room. Same activity. Still, separate. But then something small happened. He finished a set, looked at me, and said, "You good?" Not a deep question. But in that moment, it felt different. Because it wasn't about checking a box. It was about sharing effort. "I'm okay," I said. And then, without thinking too much, I added, "This is harder than I thought." He nodded. Yeah. That was it. But something shifted. Because for the first time in a while, we weren't talking about routine things. We were in the same experience. Feeling the same discomfort. At the same time. And that creates something powerful. Shared struggle. There's a reason why people bond during challenges. Your brain releases certain chemicals, endorphins, dopamine, when you push your body. But when you do it with someone else, something extra happens. You associate that feeling with them. Effort becomes connection. Discomfort becomes shared memory. And slowly, without planning it, without discussing it, we started syncing. Not perfectly. But naturally. We began noticing each other more. He adjusted his pace. I matched his rhythm. Sometimes we laughed, real laughter, not polite conversation laughter. At one point, I tried to follow his movement and completely lost balance. I almost fell. He caught my arm and said, "Careful." And we both laughed. Not because it was funny. But because it was real. Unplanned. Unfiltered. And in that moment, something clicked. We weren't trying to communicate. We were just present. Together. And presence? That's something we were missing for a long time. You see, when you talk, your brain is busy. Thinking about words. Grammar. Meaning. But when you move, you stop overthinking. You react. You feel. You exist in the moment. And that's where real connection lives. Not in perfect sentences. But in shared experience. After a few sessions, something interesting happened. We started talking more. But not in the way you might expect. Not long conversations. Just small, natural comments. Too fast. Wait. That was good. Simple words. But they flowed. Because they weren't forced. They were part of the moment. And here's the key. When communication is tied to action, it becomes easier. More natural. More real. You don't have time to overthink. You just respond. And slowly, that silent loop we were stuck in, it started breaking. Not because we sat down and fixed it. But because we moved through it. Together. There's another layer to this. Something subtle, but important. When you work out with someone, you see them differently. Not as a role. Not as husband or wife. But as a person. A human being, trying, struggling, pushing. And that changes your perspective. I started seeing him not just as the quiet guy who doesn't talk much. but as someone who shows up. Consistently. Patiently. Without needing attention. And I think, he started seeing me differently too. Not as someone who struggles with words. But as someone who tries. Who shows up. Who doesn't give up, even when it's awkward. And that mutual respect? It builds silently. Just like the distance did before. But in the opposite direction. Closer. Stronger. More connected. Now here's the twist. We didn't suddenly become a perfect couple. We still had quiet moments. Still had misunderstandings. Still had differences. But something fundamental changed. The energy. It was lighter. Warmer. More open. Because we now had something we didn't have before. A shared rhythm. And rhythm is powerful. In music. In language. In relationships. Because once you find a rhythm together, you don't have to think as much. You just move. And that movement carries you. Through silence. Through awkwardness. Through everything. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Without realizing it. This simple routine, this sweating, laughing, struggling together, was training something deeper. Not just our bodies. Not just our relationship. But our ability to listen. Not just to words. But to timing. To tone. To subtle cues. To each other. And that skill? It changes the way you experience everything. Including language. Because suddenly, listening like a native is no longer about catching every word. It's about understanding the moment. And responding, naturally. But don't get too comfortable. Because just when you think you've found a rhythm, life adds another layer. A deeper one. Because doing something together is one thing. But understanding each other, at a deeper level? That requires something else. Something slower. Something more intentional. And surprisingly, it has nothing to do with speaking more. It has to do with speaking less. Slow English, real connection. What if the reason you're not understood is not because your English is bad, but because it's too fast for your truth? Sounds strange, right? We usually think the opposite. We think, if I can speak faster, more fluently, more like a native, then everything will click. But what if speed is the problem? What if speed is the mask? That's exactly what I discovered, not in a classroom, not from a teacher, but in the quiet space between two people trying to understand each other. After we started working out together, something changed. The energy between us became lighter. Less pressure. More presence. But the way we talked? Still not perfect. Still short. Still simple. And for the first time, I stopped trying to fix that. Instead, I tried something different. I slowed down. Not dramatically. Not like a language exercise. Just, intentionally. The next time we talked, instead of rushing to finish a sentence, I paused more. I let silence exist. I chose fewer words. And I paid attention, not just to what I was saying, but how I was saying it. "You, tired today?" he asked one evening. Old me would respond quickly. Automatically. "I'm fine." But this time, I paused. "I feel a little tired." Not body, more like mind. It wasn't perfect English. But it was clearer. More honest. And something interesting happened. He understood me immediately. No confusion. No follow-up questions. Just a nod. "Yeah. I get that." That moment was small. But it changed how I saw everything. Because for the first time, I realized. Clarity doesn't come from complexity. It comes from intention. When you slow down, Your brain has time to align your thoughts and your words. You don't rush into safe sentences. You choose real ones. And that changes how people receive you. Let me explain something simple, but powerful. When you speak fast in a second language, your brain focuses on survival. Say something quickly. Don't pause. Don't make it awkward. So you use default phrases. I'm fine. It's okay. No problem. Safe. Predictable. Emotionally empty. But when you slow down, your brain shifts. From survival to expression. You start noticing what you actually feel. You give yourself permission to search for words. And in that search, something real appears. That's what started happening to me. Not overnight. But gradually. I stopped chasing fluency. I started practicing presence. And presence changed everything. There was one moment I'll never forget. We were sitting after a workout. Both tired. Quiet. That familiar silence was there again. But this time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt open. He looked at me and said, "You like this, working out together?" Simple question. But instead of answering quickly, I paused. I thought. I felt. And then I said, slowly. I like being here with you. Not just workout. Just being. That sentence took effort. It wasn't smooth. But it was real. And something shifted. He didn't respond immediately. He looked at me for a second longer than usual. And then he said, "Yeah, me too." That was it. No big speech. No dramatic moment. But somehow, it felt deeper than anything we had said before. Because it came from a place we hadn't reached before. Real connection. And here's the part that surprised me the most. The slower I spoke, the more natural he became. He started slowing down too. Choosing words more carefully. Adding small details. Not because I asked him to. But because the pace changed. And communication is like rhythm. You adjust to each other. That's something most people don't realize. Listening like a native isn't about speed. It's about rhythm. Timing. Flow. When you rush, you break that flow. When you slow down, you create space. And in that space, understanding grows. There's actually a cognitive reason behind this. When you speak slowly, your listener's brain processes meaning more deeply. It reduces cognitive load. It allows emotional cues to come through more clearly. In simple terms, they feel you more. Not just hear you. And that's what started happening between us. We weren't just exchanging information anymore. We were sharing experience. Through simple words. Through pauses. Through tone. Through presence. Now here's the twist. Slowing down felt uncomfortable at first. Really uncomfortable. Because silence feels risky. Your brain says, fill it. Say something. Don't make it weird. But every time I resisted that urge, something better happened. The conversation became more real. Less scripted. Less automatic. More human. And slowly, that fear of not being good enough started fading. Not because my English improved dramatically. But because I stopped measuring myself that way. I wasn't trying to sound like a native. I was trying to connect like a human. And that's a very different goal. A more powerful one. Because once you focus on connection, language becomes a tool. Not a barrier. And here's something you might not expect. This way of speaking, slow, simple, intentional. It doesn't just help your relationship. It trains your ear. You start noticing patterns. Tone changes. Subtle meanings. You stop chasing every word and start understanding the whole message. That's what native listening really feels like. Not perfect comprehension, but natural understanding. And all of that started not from studying harder, but from slowing down, from allowing imperfection, from choosing real over fast. And just when I thought I had found the key, life added another layer. Because connection between two people is one thing. But when family enters the picture, when kids, routines, responsibilities start growing around you, everything changes again. The rhythm shifts. The priorities shift. And the way you communicate? It gets tested, in ways you didn't expect. Because now, it's not just about understanding each other. It's about building something together. Every single day. Daily life, hidden lessons. What if the biggest breakthroughs in your life don't happen in big moments, but in the smallest, most boring parts of your day? Not during a deep conversation. Not during a life-changing event. But while you're folding laundry, making breakfast, or repeating the same routine for the 100th time. Sounds underwhelming? That's exactly why most people miss it. And I almost did too. Because when life starts to feel more stable, when the tension softens, when the connection begins to rebuild, you expect something dramatic to confirm it. A big moment. A clear sign. But real change? It hides in repetition. After we found our rhythm, working out together, speaking slower, being more present, life didn't suddenly become exciting. It became normal. And that's where the real test begins. Because normal life doesn't give you emotional music in the background. It gives you dishes, schedules, random conversations, small decisions. And inside those small moments, everything you've learned gets tested. Let me show you what I mean. One morning, we were both in the kitchen again. Different day. Same setting. I was making breakfast. He walked in, still half awake, looking for coffee. Old version of us? Minimal interaction. Morning. Morning. End of story. But now, something had changed. He looked at what I was doing and said, "That smells good." Simple sentence. But here's what made it different. He didn't say it while walking away. He stayed. Watched. Present. And without thinking too much, I responded, slowly. It's simple, but I like making it. Not impressive. Not complex. But real. And instead of the conversation ending there, it continued. What is it? He asked. I explained. Slowly. With pauses. With small mistakes. And he listened. Not just politely. But with interest. That moment? It wasn't about food. It was about something deeper. We were building something, inside a normal morning. And that's when I realized something important. Daily life is not separate from connection. It is connection. Every small interaction is either building it, or slowly weakening it. There's no neutral. And once you understand that, everything changes. Because now, you're not waiting for the right moment to connect. You're using the moment you're already in. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. Those small conversations? They became my real training. Not textbook English. Not structured lessons. Real, messy, everyday communication. Do you want this? Can you help me? I don't understand. Simple phrases. But used in real situations. With real meaning. And that makes a huge difference. Because your brain learns faster when language is tied to experience. Not memorization. There's a cognitive principle behind this. When you associate language with action and emotion, your brain creates stronger neural connections. That means better recall, better understanding, and more natural use. In simple terms, you don't just remember words. You feel them. And when you feel them, you use them more naturally. That's what started happening to me. Without trying too hard. Without forcing it. Just by living. But here's the part most people don't expect. Progress didn't feel like progress. It felt subtle. Like something shifting quietly in the background. I wasn't suddenly fluent. I still made mistakes. Still paused. Still searched for words. But I wasn't stuck anymore. I was moving. And movement is everything. There was another moment. We were cleaning together, yes, dishes again, but this time different energy. He was drying. I was washing. And at some point, I said. Before. I feel like we don't do this together. He looked at me. And instead of staying silent, he said. Yeah. I didn't realize that. That sentence. Simple. But powerful. Because it showed awareness. Growth. And that's when it hit me. Change doesn't come from one big realization. It comes from many small ones. Stacked together. Over time. And daily life. That's where those small realizations happen. Quietly. Naturally. Consistently. Now let's go deeper. There's something about routine that people underestimate. They think routine is boring. Predictable. Unimportant. But routine is where identity forms. It's where habits become automatic. It's where your brain decides what's normal. And once something becomes normal, it stops feeling difficult. That's what happened with us. Speaking slowly. Normal. Sharing small thoughts. Normal. Being present. Normal. And because it became normal, it became easy. Not because we tried harder, but because we repeated it enough. That's how real change works. Not through intensity. Through consistency. And here's the beautiful part. Those small, daily moments, they didn't just improve our communication. They changed how we felt around each other. More relaxed. More open. More connected. Not in a dramatic way. But in a stable, grounded way. The kind that lasts. But don't get me wrong. It wasn't perfect. There were still days where we slipped back. Days where we were tired. Quiet. Disconnected. Because that's real life. But now, we had something we didn't have before. Awareness. And once you're aware, you can adjust. You can come back. You can rebuild, again and again. And that's what made the difference. Not perfection. But recovery. Now here's the twist. Just when I thought I understood this rhythm, something deeper showed up. Because even with better communication, even with shared routines, there was still something holding me back. Something invisible. Something that had nothing to do with him. And everything to do with me. Fear. Not loud fear. Not obvious fear. But a quiet, persistent one. The kind that whispers. What if you're still not good enough? And that fear? It doesn't disappear just because things get better. It waits. In the background. Until you're ready to face it. And trust me. I was about to. Breaking the fear loop. What if the biggest thing holding you back isn't your level, your vocabulary, or your environment, but a quiet fear you've been obeying for so long, you don't even notice it anymore? Not the loud kind of fear. Not the kind that screams, stop. I'm talking about the subtle one. The one that whispers, maybe don't say that. Maybe keep it simple. Maybe stay quiet, just in case. That fear. It doesn't look dangerous. But it controls everything. And for a long time, it controlled me. Even after things got better between us, after the workouts, the slower conversations, the small daily connections, there was still something inside me that didn't fully relax. Something that kept me, holding back. Not completely. Just enough. Enough to stay safe. Enough to avoid risk. Enough to never fully show up. And here's the tricky part. From the outside, everything looked fine. We were talking more. Laughing more. Connecting more. But inside? There was still a gap. A quiet hesitation. A moment before every sentence where my brain would check. Is this okay to say? Is this correct? Will this sound weird? That tiny pause? That's fear. And when you repeat that pause enough times, it becomes automatic. You don't even question it anymore. You just filter. Constantly. Let me show you how it works. One evening, we were sitting together, relaxed, no pressure. He said something funny. I understood it. I felt the humor. And in my mind, I had a response. A good one. A natural one. But right before I said it, my brain stepped in. What if it sounds wrong? What if he doesn't get it? What if it's not as funny in English? So instead of saying it, I smiled. And said nothing. That moment passed. Gone. And on the surface, nothing happened. But inside? Something did. Because every time you don't say what you really want to say, you train your brain to stay silent. And silence becomes your default. That's the fear loop. You hesitate, you stay quiet, you feel disconnected, you lose confidence, you hesitate more. A perfect cycle. Quiet. Invisible. Powerful. And here's the worst part. You start thinking it's just who you are. I'm not very talkative. I'm just a quiet person. I'm not good at expressing myself. But that's not your identity. That's your pattern. And patterns can change. But only if you see them. That's what happened one night. A very small moment. But it hit me differently. We were in the kitchen again, yes, always the kitchen, apparently where all life lessons happen. He was telling me something about his day. I was listening. And at one point, I wanted to respond. Not with something deep. Just a simple reaction. I get that. But again, that pause came. That hesitation. That quiet fear. And for the first time, I didn't follow it. I noticed it. I paused, not to stop myself, but to observe. Why am I hesitating? That question changed everything. Because once you question the pattern, you step outside of it. And from that place, you have a choice. So I made a small decision. I spoke. I get that, I said. Simple. Clear. Nothing special. And guess what? Nothing bad happened. No confusion. No awkward silence. No judgment. Just normal conversation. And in that moment, something clicked. Not emotionally. But logically. My fear was overestimating the risk. And underestimating my ability. That's what fear does. It creates a distorted prediction. It tells you, this is dangerous. When in reality, it's just unfamiliar. There's actually a psychological explanation for this. Your brain is wired to avoid social rejection. Even small risks, like saying something imperfect, can trigger a protective response. So your brain plays it safe. Again and again. Until safe becomes your comfort zone. But comfort zones don't build connection. They maintain distance. So if you want something different, you have to interrupt the pattern. Not in a big, dramatic way. Just in small, consistent moments. That's what I started doing. Every time I felt that pause, I noticed it. And then I gently pushed through it. Not perfectly. Not confidently. But intentionally. Say the sentence. Share the thought. Even if it's simple. Even if it's not perfect. And slowly, the fear started losing power. Not disappearing. But shrinking. Because fear needs repetition to survive. And I was breaking that repetition. There was a moment that proved this to me. We were sitting together after a long day. Relaxed. Quiet. And suddenly, I said something without thinking too much. I like this, us like this. No preparation. No overthinking. Just, real. He looked at me. Smiled slightly. And said, yeah, me too. That moment? It felt easy. Natural. Unforced. And that's when I realized something powerful. Confidence doesn't come before action. It comes after. You don't wait until you feel ready. You act, and then your brain learns that it's safe. That's how the loop breaks. Not by thinking. But by doing. Again. And again. And again. And here's the part that surprised me the most. The more I spoke honestly. The more I listened differently. Because now, I wasn't just waiting for my turn to speak. I was engaged. Present. Curious. And that changed how I understood him too. Because listening isn't passive. It's active. It's connected to how safe you feel expressing yourself. And once that fear starts fading, everything becomes clearer. Not just your words. But theirs too. And that's when I started feeling something new. Not perfect. Not fluent. But confident. Not loud confidence. Quiet confidence. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything. Just shows up. And that changed everything. But just when I thought I had broken the loop, life had one more lesson waiting. Because speaking and listening in a relationship is one thing. But when it becomes natural, when it becomes effortless, when you start laughing, reacting, understanding without trying, that's a whole different level. And trust me, we were getting close to that. Closer than I ever expected. Because the next shift, it didn't come from effort. It came from something much simpler. Something you can't fake. Something you can't force. Laughter. Real laughter. The kind that doesn't need translation. Laughing like natives. Have you ever laughed at the exact same moment as someone else, without needing to explain why? No translation. No thinking. No, wait, what does that mean? Just, instant understanding. That moment? That's when you know something has changed. Not your vocabulary. Not your grammar. Something deeper. Your connection. Your timing. Your ability to feel the language, not just process it. And for the first time, I experienced that. Not in a classroom. Not from studying. But sitting next to my northern hubby, laughing at something completely ordinary. It happened on a random evening. We were tired. Not the dramatic kind of tired. Just the quiet, end of the day kind. He was telling me a story about something small that happened earlier. I don't even remember the details. But at one point, he made a tiny comment. Dry. Subtle. Very him. And somehow, I got it. Not just the words. The tone. The timing. The intention behind it. And I laughed. Immediately. Without translating. Without analyzing. Just laughed. He looked at me, slightly surprised. Not in a big way, but enough to notice. And then he smiled. That small moment? It felt different. Because something invisible had shifted. Before, when he spoke, my brain would do this. Listen, translate, understand, react. A 4-step process. Slow. Heavy. Controlled. But in that moment, it became listen, feel, react. That's it. No delay. No effort. Just flow. And that's what people mean when they say, like a native. It's not about perfect pronunciation. It's not about knowing every word. It's about timing. Connection. Natural response. But here's the part nobody tells you. You don't get there by trying to sound like a native. You get there by becoming comfortable enough to stop trying so hard. That's what all those small changes were doing. The slow speaking. The shared routines. The honest moments. The awkward mistakes. They weren't just improving my English. They were retraining my brain. From control to trust. And trust? That's what allows natural communication to happen. Let me explain something interesting. Your brain processes language in 2 main ways. One is analytical, focused on rules, structure, correctness. The other is intuitive, focused on patterns, rhythm, and meaning. When you're learning, you rely heavily on the analytical side. But real communication? It lives in the intuitive side. And the intuitive side only activates when you feel safe. Relaxed. Present. That's why laughter matters. Because when you laugh, your brain relaxes. Your guard drops. Your processing becomes faster, more natural. And suddenly, you're not learning anymore. You're just experiencing. That's what started happening to us. More and more. Small jokes. Tiny comments. Shared reactions. Moments that didn't need explanation. And each one, it built something. Confidence. Not loud confidence. But quiet certainty. I can do this. Not perfectly. But naturally. There was one moment I'll never forget. We were working out again, yes, still the strong cow era. I tried a new movement. Completely failed. Lost balance. Almost fell. Again. And before I could even say anything, he said, "Still strong cow?" And I burst out laughing. Not because the sentence was perfect. But because it was ours. A shared reference. A shared memory. A shared language. And in that moment, I didn't feel like someone learning English. I felt like myself. That's the real goal. Not to become someone else. Not to sound like a textbook. But to be fully yourself, in another language. And that only happens when you stop separating language from life. Because language is not something you use. It's something you live. Through moments. Through emotions. Through connection. And laughter. That's one of the clearest signs that you're living it. Not studying it. Now here's the twist. Once we started laughing more, everything else became easier. Talking felt lighter. Listening felt faster. Silence felt comfortable. Because laughter breaks tension. It resets the emotional space. And when the emotional space is clear, communication flows. That's why some people can speak very simple English, but feel completely connected. And others can speak perfectly, but still feel distant. Because connection isn't built on correctness. It's built on shared experience, shared emotion, shared rhythm. And we finally had that. Not perfectly, not constantly, but consistently enough. And that changed everything. Now, when he spoke, I didn't panic. I didn't overanalyze. I just listened and responded naturally. And when I spoke, I didn't try to impress. I didn't try to be perfect. I just expressed. Simply. Honestly. Freely. And that's when I realized something powerful. Listening like a native is not about your ears. It's about your state, your comfort, your connection, your willingness to be present. Because when those things align, understanding becomes effortless. And that's exactly where we were. Not at the end, but at a place that felt real, stable, alive. But every story needs a moment where everything becomes clear. Where all the small pieces come together. Where you look back and finally understand what really happened. Not just what changed, but why it mattered. And for me, that moment came quietly. Not with a big event. Not with a dramatic realization. But with something much simpler. Something most people overlook. A normal day. A normal moment. That suddenly felt complete. The real happy ending. What if the ending you've been waiting for isn't a perfect life, but a moment where nothing needs to change anymore? Not because everything is perfect, but because you finally see it clearly. That moment came to me on a day that looked completely ordinary. No special plan. No big event. No emotional setup. Just a normal day. The kind of day I used to overlook. We woke up. He made coffee, still quietly, still without announcing it. I made breakfast. We moved around each other in that small, familiar space. Nothing dramatic. Nothing new. But something felt different. Not outside. Inside. We sat down. He looked at me and said, "You sleep okay?" And I answered, naturally, without thinking too much. "Yeah. I feel good today." Not, "I'm fine." Not automatic. Not safe. Just, real. And he nodded. That same quiet nod. But this time, I understood it. Not just the action. The meaning. I hear you. I'm here. We're okay. And for the first time, I didn't need more. That's when it hit me. Nothing in that moment was extraordinary. But everything was enough. And that's something I didn't understand before. I used to think a happy ending meant everything changes. Better communication. No misunderstandings. Perfect connection. But real life doesn't work like that. You don't eliminate problems. You change how you move through them. And when you do, even ordinary moments feel different. Let me show you something. Later that day, we went out for a walk. Nothing planned. Just walking. At one point, he said something, again, simple, a little dry, very him. And I laughed. Immediately. Naturally. Without thinking. And he smiled. And we kept walking. That's it. No big conversation. No emotional climax. Just a moment. But inside that moment, everything we had built was there. The awkward beginnings. The quiet distance. The misunderstandings. The small efforts. The slow conversations. The shared workouts. The strong cow jokes. All of it. Stacked together. Creating something real. And that's when I understood something deeply. A happy ending is not a final destination. It's a state. A way of experiencing what you already have. Because if you had shown me this exact moment months ago, I might not have recognized it. I might have thought, that's it. But now? It felt complete. Because I had changed. Not into someone perfect. But into someone more present. More honest. More connected. And that changed everything. Now let's talk about something important. Because if you're still watching, still listening, there's a reason. Maybe you felt that distance. Maybe you've struggled with words. Maybe you've told yourself, I'm not good enough. But here's the truth. It was never about being perfect. It was never about speaking fast. It was never about knowing more. It was about one thing. Showing up. Honestly. Imperfectly. Consistently. Because connection doesn't require perfection. It requires presence. And presence? That's something you can practice. Right now. In your next conversation. In your next small moment. You don't need a big change. You don't need a new plan. You don't need to wait until you're ready. You just need to do something small. Say one real sentence. Pause before you respond. Listen without preparing your answer. Laugh when something is actually funny, even if you don't catch every word. That's how it starts. And that's how it grows. Slowly. Naturally. Real. And here's the part most people don't expect. When you focus on connection, everything else improves. Your listening becomes sharper. Your speaking becomes smoother. Your confidence becomes stronger. Not because you forced it, but because you removed what was blocking it. Fear. Pressure. Perfection. And what's left is you. Real. Present. Enough. Now, if you look at us today, we're not a perfect couple. We still have quiet moments. Still have differences. Still have days where things feel off. But we don't get lost in them anymore. Because we know how to come back. To each other. Through small actions. Through simple words. Through shared moments. And sometimes. Through laughter. Real laughter. The kind that doesn't need translation. The kind that reminds you. You're not alone. You're not behind. You're not good enough. You're just learning. Living. Connecting. In your own way. And that's more than enough. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this. Don't wait to become perfect, to start connecting. Start connecting. And watch everything else follow. Because in the end, it's not about sounding like a native. It's about feeling like yourself, in any language. And once you reach that point, You're not just surviving anymore. You're living. Fully. Honestly. And finally, together. What if the life you're chasing, the confidence, the connection, the native level understanding, is not something you need to reach someday, but something you can start feeling in your very next conversation? Not when your English is perfect. Not when you stop making mistakes. But the moment you decide to be real. Because here's the truth most people never tell you. Fluency is not built in silence. Connection is not built in perfection. And confidence is not built by waiting. It's built in the small, awkward, honest moments you almost skip. So next time you feel like staying quiet, say one simple thing. Next time you don't understand everything, stay in the moment anyway. Next time you feel not good enough, show up anyway. Because that's exactly how everything begins to change. And if this story felt familiar, if even one moment made you think, that's me, then you're not behind. You're right at the beginning of something powerful. This channel is where we turn real-life stories into real English, real listening, real connection, the way it actually happens in the U.S. today. Slow, natural, emotional storytelling designed to help you train your ears like a native, B1, C2, without pressure, without boring lessons. So don't just watch. Be part of this journey. Subscribe now for weekly stories that change how you feel English, not just learn it. Like the video if you've ever felt stuck, but didn't give up. Comment below, what's one small sentence you will say today, even if it's not perfect? Because your story? It's just getting started. And trust me, the next one might feel even more like yours.